Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Ruchi Tiwari and I am an assistant professor of English in Rabindranath Tagore University, part of ISEC group of institutions. Today we are going to discuss the topic barriers to communication. Before we start with barriers, we would first see what communication is. The process of communication is a universal phenomena. Communication starts from the point when the child is born and it continues till the person dies. Communication is basically transfer of message from the sender to the receiver. The flow of information from one party to the other party. And the receiver gives a proper feedback, then the communication cycle becomes complete. So communication is basically the transfer of message from the sender to the receiver. Now, in this process of communication, many a times we face hurdles or obstacles. Now, the other name of hurdle or obstacle is called barrier. The word barrier basically means an obstruction in the flow or in the path of communication. Now, these barriers can occur due to many reasons, but these barriers lead to communication failure or communication breakdown. There are many kinds of barriers, like physical barrier, semantic barrier, and socio-psychological barrier. First, we will see what is a physical barrier. Now, physical barrier occurs mainly due to three main reasons: noise, distance, and time. Noise refers to the environmental factors. Now, when the message is being passed from the sender to the receiver, many times the environment acts as a hindrance. For example, if there is a loud noise occurring in between when the person is speaking, so this noise also obstructs the flow or path of communication. For example, suppose there is a lot of rainfall happening or there is thunderstorm. At that point also, when a person is trying to communicate, there are obstructions. The message is not audible to the receiver. So noise or environmental factors also act as obstruction in the flow of communication. Now, another thing is time. Time is something very crucial, very important, which acts as an obstruction in the path of communication. The timing of communication, when should we communicate, is very, very important. Suppose a person with whom we want to communicate is very angry, is not in a good mood, or is tense or frustrated. So when at that point of time, if we try to communicate, the communication process is not effective. The person will not see things in the right perspective, and there are chances of communication failure or communication breakdown. So timing, at what time should communication take place, really plays a very important role for effective communication. Now, another aspect is distance. If there is a huge distance between the sender and the receiver, then also the flow of communication is not very smooth. Although due to the latest technology and inventions, we have social media, mobile phones through which we can communicate with persons sitting far away from us, but still these technology inventions, they also have some limitations. Like for example, we have internet problems, we have network problems, so the communication at time is not smooth, the flow of message is not smooth. So distance also acts as a barrier to communication. It hampers the path of communication. So we have seen till now that in the process of communication, physical barrier plays a very important role. Now, after physical barrier, we have semantic barrier. Semantic barrier is also a very important barrier in the process of communication. Semantic, the word semantic refers to the language that we use. So we all mostly communicate using a language. Of course, we have sign language, body language, where we don't use or speak words, but using or speaking words is the most common way of communicating. So when language also acts as a barrier in communication, many times what happens is the language that we speak is not understood fully by the receiver. If a person is speaking in French or German, and if that language is not familiar with the receiver to whom we are trying to communicate, then it will act as a barrier. Even if the language is understood commonly by the sender and the receiver, many times it happens that the words that are being used are having two meanings. Ambiguous words are there, Or many times people use jargons, they use scientific words, technical words. There are technical words to every subject. So if that is being used, many times the message is not conveyed properly and effectively, and that acts as a barrier. Like, for example, a teacher is teaching in the class, or doctor is talking to a patient. If the doctor is using medical terms all the time, the patient is not able to understand what the problem is or what the disease is. Many teachers also do, they sometimes use technical words, and it becomes difficult for students to understand. So use of this kind of language also acts as a barrier in communication. So semantic barrier is also another very important barrier in communication. Now, the third barrier which we are going to talk about today is socio-psychological barrier. This barrier is faced and used by all the people around the world. The word socio-psychological basically refers to social means society, and psychology is the study of behavior. So our communication is deeply affected by our mindset, by our thinking. So socio-psychological barrier refers to the barrier which is there, which is affected because of our behavior, when we are thinking something else, when we are speaking something else, the way we behave in society. When we are behaving in a society, it is mainly dependent on our status. Many a times we get conscious because of the age that we have in the society. So what happens is, if you have a particular status in society, when you are speaking to a person who is at a lower level or maybe junior to you, so you speak in a different manner, and when you're speaking to a colleague, you speak in a different manner. So the way you behave, it majorly is dependent on the status that you're carrying at home, also in the society. So status barrier, this word status barrier is often used, also acts as a barrier in communication. Now apart from that, we have generation gap. Generation gap also acts as a very big barrier in communication. This problem is commonly faced especially by teenagers, when there is a age gap between the teenagers and their parents, and generation comes in between. The two generations, they think differently, their experiences are different. So because of that, there is a barrier in which they communicate. The parents think differently and children think differently, and they are not able to come at a common platform. They are not able to understand each other. So the communication there is a breakdown in communication and acts as a barrier. So generation gap also acts as a barrier. Now apart from that, people have some very closed mind, closed thinking or rigid thinking. People are not ready to accept new ideas. They are not ready to accept other people's opinions. Because of this closed-mindedness, there is a lot of problem in communication with that kind of a person, because they are not able to accept. So we should be flexible in our approach. People should be flexible. We should be able to understand what the other person is saying. We should be open to new ideas. Then only communication becomes possible. So in socio-psychological barrier, status barrier, generation gap, closed-mindedness, all these aspects are coming, which are acting as barriers to communication. Now, the important thing comes up here is, all these physical barrier and socio-psychological barrier, semantic barrier, how can we overcome this problem? How can we cross this problem? How can we solve this problem of barrier to communication? Now we can solve this problem is, firstly, in our home, at our workplace, if we have an atmosphere of mutual trust and confidence, where we are able to openly communicate with each other, even if our views don't match with each other, but we are able to understand the other person's perspective, if we are able to respect the other person's opinion in spite of disagreeing, then also we can overcome this barrier. We can come to a common platform and agree on certain topics and have a smooth flow of communication. So an atmosphere of confidence and trust is very crucial for overcoming this barrier. The language that we use while communicating should be very simple and flawless. If we use too much of jargon, too much of technical terms, again it acts as a barrier. So the language should be very smooth, simple language, a layman's language, which is easily understood by others. So while teachers also, while teaching in class, or doctors talking to patients, or scientists talking to a common man, the language should be understood by common people. So that's why we find audio-visual communication, television, all is these are very popular media of communication, because the language that they use or the way they present their ideas is so effective and so powerful that it touches the heart of the masses. So the language is very, very important. And we should try to have more of face-to-face communication with each other rather than using the social media or the internet or the email, because face-to-face communication is the most powerful and effective communication where we get instant or spontaneous feedback. So all these methods can be used to reduce the barriers, to overcome the barriers to communication. In our daily life, whenever we see that people are there around us who are not able to understand us, or there are students where teachers are teaching, they're not able to understand, if they take these small little measures where they use simple language and build an atmosphere of confidence between the sender and the receiver, then the communication definitely will be very powerful and very effective, and all the barriers could be easily overcome. So with this, I end my presentation. Thank you so much.